6 gunshots shatter the quiet night. The echoes of the shots linger, and then nothing. But the horror doesn't end with the sound of the gunfire. It's what happens next that will leave you stunned. Jason Bloomfield, a 46-year-old man from Fort Lauderdale, was shot dead by the person closest to him, his girlfriend, Veanitta Lenon. But here's the chilling part. After taking his life, she didn't call for help. She didn't flee the scene. Instead, Veanitta moved Jason's body into a bedroom, barricaded herself inside with it, and stayed there for 5 days. While his decomposing body lay just feet away, she used his phone to transfer money from his bank account and attempted to erase all traces of the crime. But it wasn't until Jason's own family, his 15-year-old son and mother, forced their way into the apartment that the truth came to light. Why would someone kill the person they loved, and why would they stay with the body for days afterward? The investigation into Jason's death reveals much more than a simple crime of passion. It unearths a deeper, darker story of deception, desperation, and an unsettling motive. Jason Bloomfield was a 46-year-old man with a passion for life, especially his love for the Miami Dolphins. He lived in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, with his girlfriend, Veanitta Lenon. Though Jason was deeply involved with his family, especially his 15-year-old son and his mother, who were the cornerstones of his life, his relationship with Veanitta was more complicated. Jason's family described him as a devoted father and a man of integrity, always willing to lend a hand to those in need. His son, a young teen, looked up to him, while his mother had always been proud of his efforts to build a stable life for himself. Veanitta, on the other hand, had a different role in Jason's life. The 40-year-old woman had been in a relationship with him for several years, but those close to Jason had begun noticing signs of tension between them. While Jason's family was unaware of the deep issues between the two, Veanitta's background wasn't entirely clear. She kept to herself, and her motives for staying with Jason remained uncertain. As their relationship progressed, there were signs of growing strain, but nothing could have prepared anyone for the violence that would unfold on the night of November 23, 2024. That evening, neighbors heard 6 gunshots come from Jason's apartment. The police were soon alerted, but by the time they arrived, the damage had already been done. Veanitta, allegedly the one who pulled the trigger, had taken Jason's life in a shocking act of violence. Rather than seeking help or calling the authorities, she moved his body into a small bedroom, barricaded herself inside, and attempted to clean the crime scene. She used bleach and cleaning supplies in an attempt to erase any trace of the murder. But the plot thickened when Veanitta used Jason's phone to access his bank account, completing a Zelle transfer before disappearing from sight. This would complicate the investigation and give the authorities a deeper look into her actions following the murder. When Jason Bloomfield failed to show up for work on November 24, 2024, his colleagues immediately grew concerned. This wasn't like him. He had always been dependable, and the silence that followed his absence spoke volumes. The first person to notice his disappearance was his mother, who had been in frequent contact with him. When Jason didn't pick up the phone, and the usual check-ins went unanswered, she knew something was wrong. His 15-year-old son, too, became uneasy, as he hadn't heard from his father. Days passed with no word from Jason, and his absence wasn't something that could be easily dismissed. On November 29th, 5 days after the gunshots were heard, Jason's mother and son decided to visit his apartment. They knew that something was amiss, and with growing anxiety, they decided to take matters into their own hands. They had no idea what awaited them behind the door. When they arrived, they knocked, but there was no response. The apartment was eerily silent. In a frantic attempt to find out what had happened to him, they forced the door open. What they encountered in the small apartment would haunt them forever. Inside, they were met with an unimaginable sight. The room was filled with a stench so overpowering it almost knocked them off their feet. There, in the corner of the small bedroom, was Jason's lifeless body, decomposing after 5 days. His mother collapsed in disbelief, unable to comprehend what had occurred. Her son, Jason's 15-year-old boy, stood frozen, unable to process the gruesome scene unfolding before him. It wasn't just the discovery of the body that struck them with horror. It was the realization of how close they had been to losing Jason, and how long he had been left alone in that apartment. In a rush of emotions, confusion took hold. His son called 911, but the shock of the discovery was overwhelming. The police arrived shortly after and began their investigation. The first questions they had were simple yet crucial. Where was Veanitta? Why hadn't anyone seen or heard from her during the 5 days that Jason's body lay in the apartment? The officers knew that something wasn't right. This was no ordinary missing person case. Something far more disturbing had transpired. As the investigation began to unfold, the police noted the signs of a possible cover-up. The crime scene had been tampered with bleach stains clearly visible, suggesting an attempt to cleanse the area of any evidence. Yet, the more they dug into Jason's financial accounts, the more perplexing the situation became. The authorities found out that Veanitta had used his phone to access his bank account and transferred money through Zelle before disappearing. The idea that someone would commit murder and then attempt to clean up the scene was chilling. But it wasn't until they spoke to neighbors that the full extent of what had happened began to surface. People who had lived nearby reported hearing the gunshots the evening of November 23rd, but no one had thought anything of it at the time. As the police began piecing together the puzzle, it became clear that Jason's death was not the result of a random incident, but something much darker and calculated. When police arrived at the scene, they were immediately struck by the condition of the apartment. The small bedroom where Jason's body was found had been barricaded with a heavy couch, as if to keep anyone from entering or disturbing what lay inside. The stench of decay was overwhelming, but it wasn't the only thing that stood out. The crime scene had clearly been tampered with. Bleach stains were visible in several places, indicating an attempt to clean up the aftermath of a brutal crime. Whoever had done this had tried to cover their tracks, but the signs of a hasty cleanup were all too evident. It was clear that someone had gone to great lengths to erase the blood and evidence, but it was just the beginning of the mystery. As investigators examined the scene, they found no signs of forced entry. This suggested that the person who had killed Jason was someone he knew and trusted. That person, it would later be revealed, was his girlfriend, Veanitta Lenon. As they continued to process the crime scene, authorities also discovered that Bloomfield's phone had been used to access his bank accounts. The phone's records showed that a Zelle transfer had been made, sending money from Jason's account to an unknown recipient shortly after his death. This action pointed to a calculated effort, not just a spur-of-the-moment decision. It indicated that Veanitta had a clear plan to distance herself from the crime and cover her financial tracks. The police soon turned their focus to Veanitta herself. She had disappeared, and no one had seen or heard from her since the murder. Authorities began scouring her background and interviewing neighbors who recalled seeing her earlier that week. The more they dug into her life, the more they learned about the underlying tensions in her relationship with Jason. But despite this, no one could have predicted that she would take such a violent and extreme step. After days of investigation, Veanitta was finally located and arrested. She was charged with second-degree murder with a firearm and fraudulent use of personal identification information. At her arraignment, she entered a not guilty plea, a response that baffled many who had been following the case. Her denial seemed to contradict the mounting evidence against her, especially considering the clear financial fraud and the fact that she had tried to cover up the crime. The case soon drew widespread media attention. Neighbors, who had initially been unaware of the violent events unfolding in the apartment, expressed shock and disbelief at the revelation. Many described Veanitta as quiet and reserved, someone who kept to herself. The local community was shaken, and many questioned what could have led to such a violent act. As the story made headlines, it prompted conversations about the hidden struggles that can exist in seemingly normal relationships and the deadly consequences that can follow. The decision to take someone's life is never one made without a complex set of psychological triggers, especially when the victim is someone close, like a romantic partner. Veanitta Lenon's actions in the aftermath of Jason Bloomfield's murder reflect a mindset driven by deep internal conflict. While some may view her as a simple criminal, the truth is far more complicated. What could have pushed a woman to kill the person she once loved and share her life with? To understand Veanitta's motivations, it's crucial to look into the psychological profile of the person she was. Her relationship with Jason was not without strain. Though the details remain unclear, those close to the couple spoke of growing tensions and unresolved issues. In many relationships, especially those marred by conflict or emotional neglect, the victim may feel trapped, isolated, or powerless. For some, this can lead to acts of violence as a form of control or release from perceived oppression. Was this the case for Veanitta? The lack of outward signs of abuse doesn't mean that power struggles didn't exist within the relationship. Psychological abuse, financial manipulation, or constant emotional turmoil may have been present even if it wasn't visible to others. Domestic violence often goes beyond physical altercations. It can involve subtle forms of control, manipulation, and mental distress. In many abusive relationships, the abuser seeks to isolate the victim, undermine their self-worth, or strip away their autonomy. For Veanitta, this may have been a tipping point. The act of shooting Jason was an extreme and final expression of frustration, perhaps the culmination of years of unresolved tension that had boiled over. The nature of the crime itself suggests more than just a heated argument gone wrong. The cold, calculated actions following Jason's death are a clear indication of premeditation. Veanitta's decision to move his body into a bedroom, barricade the door, and attempt to clean the scene indicates a deliberate effort to hide her actions. It wasn't just the murder itself that pointed to a deeper motive, it was the subsequent behavior. The use of bleach and cleaning supplies to remove evidence, combined with the Zelle transfer from Jason's account, reveals a calculated effort to distance herself from the crime and take control of the situation. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision, but a well-thought-out plan to cover her tracks. Furthermore, the financial manipulation, using Jason's phone to access his bank accounts, raises the possibility that Veanitta saw this as a way to secure her future. The transfer of money might have been a way for her to tie up loose ends before facing the consequences of her actions. If she were indeed struggling with financial dependency on Jason, the murder could have been a twisted way to regain control over her life, at least temporarily. Veanitta's actions point to a deeper psychological struggle, one that perhaps no one could fully comprehend. While some may argue that the violence was due to sudden anger or a crime of passion, the aftermath suggests a much more complex motivation, rooted in years of emotional and psychological distress. The tragic death of Jason Bloomfield has left a deep, irreplaceable void in the lives of those who loved him. His 15-year-old son, who had looked up to him as both a father and a role model, now faces the painful reality of growing up without his father. The emotional toll on the boy is profound. His father's sudden and violent death has shattered his sense of safety and security. For a young person to be thrust into such trauma at a critical stage in their life can have long-lasting effects, both emotionally and psychologically. The boy's grief is compounded by the knowledge that the person who should have been a source of comfort, his mother, was responsible for the loss. Jason's mother, too, bears a heavy burden. Losing a child under such horrific circumstances is a pain no parent should endure. Her world has been upended, and the shock of discovering her son's lifeless body in such a brutal and unexpected manner is something she will carry for the rest of her life. Beyond the personal grief, she also faces the unanswered questions of why Veanitta, someone Jason trusted and loved, would take such a violent action against him. The devastation extends to extended family and friends, all of whom are left in shock and disbelief, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. The case has also drawn significant media attention, as such crimes often do. The public's reaction has been one of shock, anger, and disbelief. Media outlets have sensationalized the story, focusing on the grisly details of the crime and the complex dynamics of the relationship between Jason and Veanitta. While this helps capture the audience's attention, it also risks overshadowing the deeper issues at play, issues that are often hidden in domestic relationships. The media's focus on the violent act itself has highlighted how unchecked emotions and unspoken struggles can escalate into tragedy. In the larger picture, Jason's death serves as a grim reminder of the hidden challenges in many relationships, particularly those that seem outwardly stable. Domestic violence isn't always visible, and unresolved tensions can fester beneath the surface. This case is a tragic example of what can happen when those issues are left unaddressed. It underscores the importance of recognizing signs of emotional distress and the need for open communication in relationships, so that future tragedies can be prevented. Jason Bloomfield's death is a tragic and haunting reminder of the devastating consequences that can arise when deep-seated issues in relationships go unaddressed. On November 23, 2024, Jason's life was cut short by the person closest to him, his girlfriend Veanitta Lenon, who took his life in a violent act that shocked everyone who knew them. After the murder, she attempted to erase the evidence and cover her tracks, even using Jason's phone to complete a financial transaction, which ultimately led to her arrest. The community, along with Jason's family, was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life and try to make sense of the senseless tragedy. But the big question remains: what could have driven Veanitta to commit such an unforgivable act? Was it an explosion of anger in the heat of a moment? Or was there something deeper at play, something no one could see? Was this a crime of passion, or was it part of a larger pattern of emotional or psychological distress? I want to hear your thoughts on this case. Was this a crime born of deep frustration or something else entirely? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this story unsettling and want more true crime cases like it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There's more to come, and you won't want to miss the next disturbing case that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew.